I parked 2 houses down like I always did, not because there wasn't space in front, but because I needed the walk. I needed those extra 30 seconds to collect myself, inhale the cold Indiana air, and let the snow sting my face into alertness. Christmas Eve. Again. The house looked exactly the same. Maybe a few more twinkling lights, maybe the wreath was newer. But everything else felt stuck. I stepped onto the porch with a wrapped pie in my hand and years of unspoken history under my coat. The door creaked open before I even knocked. "Look who's finally here," my brother Mark muttered, not even bothering a smile. He walked back into the living room without waiting for me to step in. Inside, the warmth hit me like a wall. Turkey, cinnamon, pine from the fake tree. Voices layered over each other, laughter, clinking silverware, the football game on low volume. My mother didn't look up from the kitchen counter. I smiled anyway. "Hi, Mom." She gave a distracted nod, didn't turn around. "Dinner's almost ready. Don't just stand there. Plates need setting." No hug, not even eye contact. I slipped off my boots, left the pie on the counter, and walked toward the living room. My niece, Lily, barely glanced up from her phone. Her mom, my sister-in-law, whispered something to her, and they both smirked. I used to braid Lily's hair and sneak her cookies when her parents weren't looking. Now she was taller than me, colder too. The dining table looked picture-perfect. Candles, matching plates, folded napkins. I placed forks beside the plates like I was supposed to. I couldn't help noticing the photo collage hanging near the tree. Recent vacations, graduations, baby showers. I wasn't in a single one. Dinner began with clinks and scripted gratitude. Mark talked about his firm's expansion. His wife boasted about their second vacation home in Florida. My sister Emily went on about her daughter's early admission to Brown. Then silence. Eyes landed on me like it was my cue. I cleared my throat. "I've been volunteering at the community shelter. We've started a winter meal program. It's small, but—" "Oh," Emily cut in, smiling too wide. "You mean unpaid work?" A few chuckles. Someone sipped wine. My mother didn't react. Yeah, it's volunteer-based, but it's been meaningful." Lily didn't look up. "Sounds like a lot of free time." Mark leaned back in his chair. "Still figuring out what to do with your life, huh?" I laughed quietly. I didn't want to cry. I would not cry. The meal went on like that. Praise for everyone else, silence when it came to me. At one point, I tried to change the subject, share a story about an elderly man I met at the shelter who reminded me of Dad. I didn't get past the first sentence. "Sometimes I wonder," my mother said, finally looking at me, "if all the sacrifices we made for you were even worth it." The table stayed quiet. Even the sound of chewing stopped for a second. I nodded slowly, blinked once. "Thanks for the honesty." Then it happened. I reached for the wine bottle, hand trembling slightly, not from emotion, just the cold, and poured myself a glass. A drop landed on the tablecloth. Mark didn't miss a beat. "She can't even hold a glass. No wonder she's still alone. Useless." Nobody moved. A fork scraped a plate. Someone coughed. Lily stifled a laugh. Her mother hid a smirk behind her napkin. Even Mom kept chewing. I looked at the stain, then at my shaking hands, then at the people who once celebrated my high school graduation with tears and cake. Useless. The word didn't just echo, it buried itself under my skin. It found the quiet corners of my memory. Every time I'd been dismissed, talked over, reduced. Dad would have said something, but he wasn't here anymore. He died in spring. I took care of him until the very end. Nobody else offered. Nobody even thanked me. I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, the outline of a woman everyone thought had wasted her life, a burden, a placeholder. I remembered being called too sensitive, too soft, not practical. My siblings were medals on the family's chest. I was just the reason Mom couldn't go back to work. My photo wasn't on the wall because no one had taken one of me in years, or maybe they had, and deleted it. The laughter around the table came back in waves, like nothing had been said. I stood up, calmly. "Excuse me," I said. Nobody stopped me. I grabbed my coat, stepped outside barefoot. The snow bit hard. I didn't care. I walked to my car, hand clutching the manila envelope in my purse. Inside were the documents. I had sold my small home, quietly. I planned to donate the money to expand the shelter's services, buy beds, stock the pantry, maybe even hire a counselor. It was supposed to be my Christmas gift to the family. Proof I hadn't wasted my life. But now, they didn't deserve it, not yet. Maybe not ever. I stood by the car, snow soaking through my socks, heart strangely still. They want useless? I whispered to no one. Fine, let's see what that really looks like. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken. I felt dangerous. The sun didn't rise so much as it leaked through the clouds that morning. Christmas Day, and I woke up in a budget motel 2 towns away from where they were likely already setting the breakfast table. I lay there for a minute, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, the cheap heater buzzing from the corner like it was trying to keep rhythm with my thoughts. I hadn't even said goodbye. Just left their house the night before, like a ghost slipping through their perfect family photo. The bed was stiff, the blanket smelled like bleach, and I hadn't really slept. Coffee brewed beside the television, burnt and bitter. My clothes still carried the damp sting of last night's snow. I turned on the lamp and pulled out my bag. When I can't breathe, I sort, always have. Papers, receipts, old photos, half-started notebooks, pieces of my life nobody else ever asked to see. I switched off my phone without checking. If anyone from the shelter texted, I'd answer later. There were no messages from family. Of course, I unfolded a folder marked in my own handwriting. Sent, but unread. I don't remember when I wrote that on there. Years ago, maybe. Inside, letters I'd written but never sent. Some were addressed to my mother, others to Mark. One had no name at all, just to someone who cared once. I read one out loud, slowly. Hi, Mom. I spent my birthday at the shelter this year. One of the ladies gave me a cupcake. She said her son would have been my age. I cried in the bathroom so nobody would see. I missed the way Dad used to sing. You didn't call. I figured you were busy. That one stopped me cold. Another letter described the time I almost didn't make rent and slept in the back room of the thrift store. Another told of the night I called my brother 17 times from the hospital when I thought I had cancer. It turned out benign, but they never called back to know that. At first, these letters were cries for help. But somewhere along the way, they became something else. Lifelines I threw to myself, proof that I was still here. I said to the quiet room, even if I'd sent them, they'd have gone unread. My pain doesn't match their version of me. I held them over the trash can, thought about lighting a match, letting it all burn, but I folded them back, smoothed the edges. They weren't for them anymore. Scrolling through old voicemails, I saw a name flash up again and again. Mark. Always outgoing. Never incoming. The logs told their own story. Missed calls at 2 a.m. when Dad had his stroke. A call I made from the ER after being mugged outside the shelter. Another one the night before my biopsy. Not a single reply. One voicemail I'd left him still haunted me. I played it again, letting my own voice cut into the motel's quiet. Hey, I'm not asking for anything. I need to know I'm not crazy. That someone sees me. That's all. He texted 2 days later. Busy. What now? That was it. They show up for weddings and holidays, for family portraits and sympathy cards, but never for the bleeding parts of your life. Never when the pain doesn't fit the frame. I looked in the mirror above the dresser. No tears, no breakdown, just clarity. A face I recognized again. They turned absence into tradition, I said to the glass. I just stopped sending invites. I pulled out my laptop, opened a draft, started typing a short essay for the shelter's newsletter. I titled it, Surviving Holidays That Aren't Yours Anymore. It felt like breathing. Then I took the letters, all of them, and addressed them. To me, from me, postmarked from years I barely survived, sent now, when I could finally read them with different eyes. Closure doesn't always come wrapped in conversation or apology. Sometimes it arrives in your own handwriting. I stepped out into the gray morning, wrapped in 3 layers and silence. Walked toward a church I used to volunteer at. The doors were locked, but I slipped an envelope through the mail slot with a note inside. For every person who thought of ending things this year, you're not invisible. On the walk back, I stopped at a corner store, bought a small red notebook. On the first page, I wrote in block letters, "What I will never apologize for again." And the list came quickly. For leaving the table when they mocked me, for choosing peace over performance, for saying no to people who only love you broken. I sat in the car, flipped the page. Then I made a decision. A clean, heavy, grown woman's decision. I'd go back. Not to beg, not for some reheated version of acceptance, but to end this on my terms. I parked a block away so no one would see my car. The house was quiet from the outside, blinds drawn, as if it had decided to shut its eyes for good. My mother thought I'd driven back to the motel after the holiday. She'd never imagined I'd return the next afternoon, especially not alone. But there I was, walking up the driveway with a key still on my ring, telling myself I just needed to grab one box of Dad's things from the basement. Nothing more. No confrontation, no lingering. Just get in, get out. The front door opened with the same groan it always had. Inside, the air felt stale, a mix of pine cleaner and something older, heavier. Rooms don't hold people, they hold verdicts. I walked through the hallway lined with framed photographs. In each one, I was a shadow on the edge, cropped at the shoulder, turned at the wrong angle, blurred. Over years, it wasn't an accident. They were writing me out without ever saying so. I stopped at one frame of my father holding me as a child, his face half hidden behind a Christmas tree. My mother had written, "Family," at the bottom in gold ink. Family. It creaked out of my head like the basement door handle when I finally turned it. The sound felt like a wound tearing open again. The steps down to the basement were steep, lined with boxes leaning like drunks after a party. I flicked on the single bulb. Dust swirled up, sparkling for a second before falling again. It smelled of cardboard, old winters, and forgotten arguments. I found the box I came for near the back wall. Dad's cufflinks, his old flannel shirts, some records he never played when company was over. But another box caught my eye, shoved behind a water heater. A strip of masking tape across it read, "Do not open. Dad." I sat back on my heels, staring. Respect wrestled with a rising need to know. My father had been careful with words, but he was never careless. Why hide this? My hands moved before my head did. The tape tore with a sound like fabric ripping. Inside were receipts, notebooks, and a small leather-bound journal worn soft at the edges. His handwriting filled the first page, December 1998. I want to protect her from what her mother won't admit. I read on, each entry like a match striking. She tries so hard, but they keep calling her ungrateful. I don't know how to shield her without breaking this family. The words slid under my skin. He knew. He'd seen. He'd written it down because no one else would listen. One entry stopped me. Christmas 2003. I remembered that night, being dragged into the basement after guests left, my mother's voice sharp as glass. "Smile. Be grateful. Don't embarrass me." I'd had bruises on my arm from my brother shoving me earlier. Dad wrote, "I wanted to tell her to stop. I wanted to tell them all." But the truth would destroy what little we have left. I could see it again now, the cold basement floor under my knees, my father standing by the washer, eyes on the cement, fists in his pockets. He hadn't been silent because he didn't care. He'd been silent because he was tired and scared. The journal was full of small signs he'd left for me without me ever seeing them. Notes in my lunchbox, the way he'd fix things before I noticed they were broken, how he'd stand a little closer when my brother raised his voice. Pieces of a shield I thought had never existed. I sat on a crate, the journal trembling in my lap. Not from the chill, from the truth. This wasn't an accident. My isolation had been engineered. Easier to call the quiet child unstable than to face the family's dysfunction. My mother had played her part perfectly, turning my words into drama, my feelings into instability. And my father, he had tried, just too softly. I closed my eyes. Grief pressed against anger until the two were indistinguishable. Relief, too. A strange relief in knowing I hadn't been imagining it all. Someone had believed me once, even if only on paper. I slid the journal into my coat pocket with the box I'd come for. Walked back up the stairs, every creak now a verdict reversed. In the hallway, I didn't look at the photographs again. I didn't need to. My mother had asked me to come back tomorrow for the funeral dinner of an uncle who barely remembered my name. I wouldn't, not this time. You don't owe your absence an explanation, especially to those who demanded your silence. Outside, the air was cold but clear. I put the box in the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove. Not crying, not shaking, just steady. For the first time, I felt the ground under me was mine. At a lake a few miles away, I pulled over. Sat on the hood of my car, the journal open to one last page. My father's handwriting. She deserves better. One day, I hope she knows. I traced the words with my thumb, whispered, "I know now." And the wind off the water carried it away. I walked into the parlor carrying Dad's box, heart humming like a spring wound tight. The room was dim, Christmas lights still glowing softly, ornaments dangling like whispered judgments. Devin sat reading a newspaper, pages folded so stiff. Aileen glanced up from the sofa, eyes narrowing. My mother hovered by the mantel, wiping her hands on a towel. They spoke polite words. "You're here early. Need coffee?" But the air between us cracked. I laid the locked box and the journal on a side table. I didn't ask permission. My pulse quickened. I straightened my shoulders. I would not shrink tonight. I cleared my throat. Voices stilled. I drew out one letter from the sent but unread folder. Hands trembling just a bit, I read it aloud. "I stayed in that hotel room all evening while the rest of you laughed around your tree. I cried into the bath towel so Dad wouldn't hear me sobbing in the parking lot." Silence swallowed the room. Devin shifted, his jaw clenched. Eileen's face turned pink. Mother dropped her gaze. I asked softly, "Did you ever open these?" Devin answered, voice low, "We thought you wanted space." "Space? Or distance?" I pushed. "You always made the choice." The walls closed in. I felt them lean toward me, judging. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down. I'd signaled Silas earlier. Now. I held up my screen for them to see. The app read, "Account closed by Harper Trust Co. Notice mailed to old address." Aileen gasped. Devin stared. I said, "You closed my only account without telling me?" She stammered. "It was dormant." I replied, "I paid the fees. You never told me." The weight of silence pressed against my chest. Mother's quiet sob broke somewhere behind me. Her tears spoke louder than any defense. That letter, that bank account, they were connected. A pattern, a betrayal. I remembered all those times I begged to be seen, to be included. And always they whispered I was too much, too emotional, dramatic. Tonight, I wasn't begging anymore. I was standing, my voice firm. "You didn't trust me with an account? You've always said I couldn't manage a thing." Eileen opened her mouth to interrupt. I raised one hand. I turned to Silas, hidden behind the edges, whispered, "Record this." These weren't arguments for guilt. They were evidence, anchors of my dignity. I walked over to the coffee table, placed a heavy binder in their view. It read, "Conditions for future contact, apology, return of financial rights, public acknowledgement." I said, "I am no longer your silent attendance. If you want me, you meet these terms." Devin's face twisted. Mother's lips quivered. Aileen glared. My mother murmured, "We'll talk later." I nodded and turned. I left the binder open, walked toward the door. I wanted to look back, but I didn't. I closed the door behind me and felt something shift inside. It was just after 9 when the pounding started. 3 sharp blows against my door that didn't sound like family, but like a warning. I stood still for a second, my mug halfway to my lips, staring at the door. Through the peephole, Aileen's pale face looked carved from ice. Devon stood beside her, arms folded, his body angled forward like a soldier about to issue orders. They hadn't called, hadn't texted, but here they were, filling the hallway with their impatience. I opened the door and stepped aside without inviting them in. Aileen's first words were soft on the surface but cut beneath. "We came to talk calmly." Her eyes darted over my apartment like a critic at a bad exhibit. Devon didn't wait. He walked in and sat down, scanning my bookshelves, my father's framed photo, my life. I almost smiled at the irony. They'd never knocked before when barging into my decisions. I offered them tea out of habit, but already knew this would not be a civil evening. Eileen started right away, her voice dipped in sweetness like poison. "You've always misunderstood our intentions." She glanced at Devon. "We've tried to help you," Devon added. "You exaggerate everything, always have. You make us look cruel when we're not." They turned my truths into accusations, just like always. Aileen slipped in the word therapy with practiced ease. "We think you need help processing things." My hands tightened around the mug. This wasn't care, it was control in its Sunday dress. I could see the trifecta they always used: minimize, deflect, pathologize. Devon reached into his coat and slid an envelope halfway across my coffee table. "This isn't official, yet," he said, "but if you keep escalating, we may have no choice." I stared at the return address, a mental health facility. The paper inside was crisp. I felt the room tilt, but my voice stayed low. "You're threatening to commit me?" Aileen leaned forward, palms open like she was pleading. "Only because we care. You're unstable. You left the funeral. You're stirring things up online." Her tone was almost tender, but the words were bars of a cage. I set my mug down and rose slowly. "You want to lock me up because I finally stopped swallowing lies?" My voice was steady. Inside me, an old scene flickered. The little girl who learned that silence was survival. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I pulled my phone from my pocket, pressed record, held it out. "Repeat that for the record." Devon snapped. "You're paranoid." "No," I said. "I'm prepared." I told them calmly that a cease and desist had already been filed. "Next time you try to gaslight me, it'll be in court, not in my living room." The words tasted like metal but felt like air. They stood. Aileen's face held the martyr's mask. We tried. Devon's jaw twitched, but he said nothing. I opened the door wide and stepped aside. They left, their footsteps loud in the hall, like retreating thunder. I locked the door, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with the rush of release. I texted Silas. "You were right. It's happening." Then I pulled Dad's leather journal from the shelf and laid it next to me on the couch. It was the one object in my life that still felt like truth. Opening to a blank page, I wrote, "If they silence me, let this page speak." For the first time in my life, I wasn't a supporting character in their story. I was the author of my own. The apartment was dark, except for the pale glow of my laptop. Outside, the street was buried in snow, soundless except for the occasional rumble of a plow. Inside, my phone buzzed with the family group chat. "We need to talk again." I ignored it. My heart beat hard as my fingers hovered above the keyboard. The drive folder where I stored my public talk from last summer blinked up at me, but the file was gone. In its place, a blank gray icon stared back like an empty frame. I whispered to no one. They erased me digitally, like they always have offline. I clicked deeper. The metadata logs told their story in numbers and timestamps. Deleted last night at 11:07 p.m., the IP address unmistakably Devon's. I screenshot everything, my hands steady even as my pulse raced. With my camera on, I called Silas and recorded my screen, narrating into the microphone. They erased my public record. They erased my proof. A soft knock at the door startled me, but when I went to check, the hallway was empty. No footsteps, no voice. Just that same weight of being watched. Minutes later, the door creaked again, and this time my niece, Luna, slipped inside without waiting. She clutched her tablet like a shield. "You're just the helper, right?" she said, her voice echoing the tone of adults who'd trained her. The word landed like a slap. Helper. My reflection on the monitor stared back, the calm face cracking in places no one could see. I breathed in, breathed out, and chose not to answer. She blinked, uncomfortable, then muttered something about her mother waiting outside and left as quickly as she'd come. I paced the room, my mind running through every time they had called me dramatic, unstable, overreacting. For years I'd mistaken silence for survival. Now silence felt like strategy. I drafted a short note for my newsletter. Deleted doesn't mean gone. My truth is still mine. My finger hovered over the post button, but I paused. I'd learned the power of timing. When to speak, when to hold back. I texted Valeria, "I need you ready." Then I uploaded the missing video to a secure backup, watermarking every frame with "belongs to Marisol Dahmer." I composed an email to my family. "You took one proof. I have 20 more you know nothing about." Each word steadied me. I closed the laptop, walked to the window, and watched the snow swallow the streetlights. "They can't erase me again," I whispered. It wasn't defiance for its own sake. It was the quiet beginning of a plan. The cafe was almost empty when I walked in, the cold December sun cutting thin slats of light across the floor. Silas was already at a booth, sleeves rolled up, a mug of black coffee untouched in front of him. I slid into the seat opposite, feeling the warmth of the cup between my hands, even though it wasn't mine. I laid everything out on the table. The logs from my drive, the copied journal pages, the screenshots of the deletion metadata. Silas studied each one quietly, his face tightening with each page. "They'll come after you harder now," he said finally, his voice low. We talked strategy. Timed release, witnesses on standby, a journalist ready to publish. "They know you're on to them," he cautioned. "The next move is theirs." I stared at the window, watching cars glide by like ghosts, and said, "Good. Let them make it." After lunch, I drove back to the Harper house with a plain box in the passenger seat. The roads were slick. The decorations still up on porches looked like fading props from a play. The house was just as I'd left it, but colder somehow. Devin was in the parlor, pretending to read a newspaper. Aileen sat near the fire, flipping a page without looking at it. Mother was a shadow moving between kitchen counters. I stepped inside, placed the box on the table, and said, "I came to return what you thought was gone." Their eyes flickered. "This is what was stolen, replaced, manipulated." I opened the folder just enough for them to see the edge of a page. "You switched proof. I have the originals." Their silence was louder than denial. I leaned on the edge of the table and began recounting what they didn't know, or thought I didn't know. Last winter, basement, midnight, you and Charles talking about suppressing the journal. I took out my phone and tapped play. The recording was muffled but clear. Aileen's voice, tense and afraid. "Don't let her leak everything. We'll lose face." Mother gasped, covering her mouth. Devin stood, fists curled but not moving. Aileen flushed deep red. It was the first time I'd seen fear in their eyes, not anger. I slid the original pages out slowly. They bore the coffee stains, the bent corners, my father's handwriting unmistakable. "You took them," I said quietly. "You replaced them." Aileen stammered. That was from the basement box." I pressed harder. "You took them. You replaced them." The room went still, the kind of stillness that comes just before something collapses. This wasn't revenge. It was the truth standing up without my permission. I turned to my mother. "You let it happen. You stood silent." She trembled, tears gathering but no apology forming. I spoke evenly, each word a nail in a coffin I hadn't built but was now closing. "I will go public tomorrow, and I will bring everyone who helped." Devin lunged toward me, but I didn't flinch. My hand stayed on the folder like a weight. I stepped back, lifted my bag, and left the binder open on the table behind me. Outside, the winter sun felt sharper, as if the air itself had been cut by what I'd left behind. I walked to my car slowly, feeling a strange steadiness in my chest. Tomorrow, the headlines would change the equation. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for their story to rewrite me. I was stepping into the light, and the narrative was mine. By the time the sun rose, I was already dressed. Black slacks, wool coat, leather-bound folder in hand. I hadn't slept, but sleep felt irrelevant now. My phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m. Alerts from news wires, independent blogs, even old contacts from college forwarding the headline, "Family Fortune Exposed, Whistleblower Daughter Speaks Out." I didn't flinch. I'd sent the press release myself at 5:58 a.m. Devin had texted at 6:12. "Stop this. We can fix it." I replied at 6:13. "Too late. You had your chance." By 7:30, I was walking toward the Harper house. A cold wind cut across the street, but it didn't move me. Journalists waited behind tripods, shivering, murmuring my name. Neighbors peeked from curtains. Every step forward felt like crossing a threshold that had held me back for decades. Today, there was no going back. Devin was pacing in the foyer when I arrived. He looked smaller than usual, less polished. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. Eileen stormed out from her study, her lips already moving, but her voice faltering. I raised my hand. "The banks froze the accounts this morning," I said. "Joint, personal, all of it." Devin blinked. "We didn't authorize—" "You're not the only ones with lawyers," I cut in. "You froze what you owed me. That's theft by default." The cameras clicked. Microphones crept forward. I didn't flinch. "You thought I'd fade out. That grief would silence me." I looked between them. "You were wrong." Reporters scribbled. I didn't wait for their questions. I stepped forward and opened the folder. Inside was the original contract. Yellowed, creased, signed in our father's neat handwriting. I read the key line aloud. "Ownership to be held solely in the name of Marisol Dahmer, irrevocable upon his death." Devin shifted. Aileen tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "That was years ago," Devin muttered. "It's outdated." I looked at him dead on. "Old doesn't mean void." "You just counted on me never finding it." The silence was heavier this time. Even Mother had come to the edge of the kitchen. Her expression wasn't angry. It was cracked. Something in her recognized it was over. I turned to the wall behind them. The family photos, polished frames, curated smiles. I pointed. "You built an image," I said. "You cut me out of it one crop at a time." Aileen snapped. "You think this is a win?" I met her eyes. I think I finally stopped losing. Devin took a step forward, then stopped. His hands trembled. My mother whispered something, inaudible. I didn't wait to decode it. I walked past them, out to the porch. The reporters followed. I cleared my throat and began to read from the paper in my hand. This morning, I reclaimed my name, my truth, and my inheritance. For every person who's ever been erased in silence, today is proof that silence can end. The wind carried my voice. I kept going. I am demanding a full public apology, financial restitution for withheld assets, and formal correction of every public narrative that excluded me. I raised my head. You can refuse, but the truth's already out. The world won't unsee it. Behind me, Devin's voice cracked. Aileen swore under her breath. My mother covered her face with both hands and didn't say a word. But me? I stepped down from that porch as if it were a stage I'd finally finished performing on. The cameras lowered. Somewhere down the block, a child's sparkler lit the edge of the sky. New Year's Eve had come, but for me, the new year had already begun. January 2nd. The city was quiet again. No more fireworks, no news vans, no urgent calls. I woke up before the sun, not out of dread, but habit. Only this time, I didn't feel the usual weight pressing against my chest. The silence was different now, not emptiness, space. I made coffee, walked past the living room without turning on the news, sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The inbox was full. Strangers, supporters, even distant relatives I hadn't heard from in decades. Some wrote things like, "Thank you for speaking for all of us," or "I wish I had your courage when I had the chance." Others were clumsy apologies. Most weren't worth answering. A young journalist had left a voicemail around 3 a.m. She said, "You've become the voice of erased daughters. Do you feel like a symbol now?" I didn't. I just felt done. I pulled a box from the back of my closet. It had followed me through every move, untouched for 10 years. I'd taped it shut the night of my father's funeral. I opened it slowly. Inside were two things: a worn-out journal from when I was 19, pages filled with fire and grief and dreams I'd shelved, and a drawing, crayons on yellowed paper, me, holding his hand, his smile drawn too wide, my hair a scribble. But it was real. His signature was on the back. Later that morning, I put on my coat and walked. The neighborhood had barely changed. Some houses had new paint, a few trees were taller, but the air still smelled like wet asphalt and jasmine from the old woman's yard on the corner. The cafe, the one I used to daydream about, was still there. Same sign, same chipped green door. I stepped inside. The owner, a woman about my age, looked up. I asked if she had a minute. We sat. I told her my idea, a space for daughters like me, like millions of others. Not just therapy, not charity, voice, documentation, legacy. She listened the whole time. Then she said, "You've got something the world's needed a long time." By the time I left, the idea had a name, the Echo Fund. For those never heard. For those told to be quiet. Back at my apartment, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No return address, just my name, written in a hand I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter from a woman named Sandra. She said she'd read about me online. Said she used to know my father. Loved him once, said he'd written her letters. About me, how he watched me sleep as a baby. How proud he was of how I fought with my words. She included a photo. Him, holding me. I must have been less than a year old. He looked younger. Tired, but full. Sandra wrote, "He loved you. He just didn't know how to show it, and I think he never forgave himself for that." I cried then, not from pain, from something quieter, something that didn't ask for anything back. That night, I lit a candle in the window. Not for him, not for them, for me. I wrote a final email to Devin and Eileen. "I forgive you, but I won't forget. And I don't need you anymore. We're done." There was no rage behind it, just air, clean air. Over the next few hours, I planned the first steps for the foundation: legal paperwork, potential partners, lawyers, trauma therapists, educators, one step at a time. "This is how we begin again," I whispered. Then I smiled, because for once, I believed it. Just before sunset, I went on a walk. I passed a little girl riding her bike, wobbling on training wheels. She glanced back, unsure, then grinned when she saw I wasn't judging. I waved. She waved back. "You're doing fine," I said quietly, though maybe it was to myself. I passed a shop with mirrored glass. For a moment, I caught my reflection. Nothing remarkable. Coat, scarf, messy bun. But for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. The world hadn't changed. But I had. I walked home. Not to a place, to myself.